Interested in real estate? How about wealth? Well, they go hand in hand. And here, you'll learn all about it. Welcome to Be the Bank, a podcast where we discuss and debate the topics centered around real estate investing. Your host, Justin Bogard, shares insights into investing in real estate to create real wealth and passive income for you and your family. He'll share stories of real estate investments done right, walk you through the process of owning a real estate note, and most importantly, educate you so you can be the bank. This is Be the Bank, brought to you by BrightPath Notes. Now, here's your host, Justin Bogard.
Welcome back. This is episode number 11, and today we're going to be discussing due diligence. And as it relates to certain note investors approach this a little bit differently, depending on if it's a performing loan, a non-performing loan, whether what pools of money they're using to buy this asset, and then also looking at it from a lens of some of my partner in crime here, Richard Thornton, who I'm going to have on today. We're going to kind of break down the differences on why we approach things a little bit differently as it comes to due diligence. So stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by BrightPath Notes. Richard Thornton, thanks again for being on our show today. Episode number 11 brought to you by BrightPath Notes. How are you doing today, my friend?
Glad to be here. It is 90 degrees in sunny California.
Yeah, Southern California is like 5 hours away from you, right?
That's right. That's right. So.
I always forget how long the state is. So I think I visited there like twice in my lifetime. So if you're from the northern part of California, the southern tip, I'm sure it's a pretty like it's like traveling the entire country, pretty much north and south.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, if they're in San Francisco, gee, let's pop down to LA." But okay, that's like if you're in DC, let's go to Miami, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Now that is something I can relate to. I can judge that distance, so that's pretty cool.
That's right.
But we're not here to talk about that today. What I want to discuss is due diligence. And I know since I've known you, I didn't really know how you approach things until kind of earlier this year with due diligence, and also probably the same for me. So since we've been doing a lot of deals together, Richard, it's been brought to my attention that we go about it a little bit differently. And not that it's wrong. We just look at it differently.
I stand on my head. It's it's a good way to do it.
You're upside down and I'm right side up. Okay, I got it.
I'm upside down, so the deal's never upside down.
I mean, that's a great way to look at it.
Right.
So when it comes to performing loans, Richard, because that's kind of the easier one to look at, if you will. From your take on it, you have somebody that is a broker, and they say, "Hey, Richard, I've got this loan here. It's a first lien position loan. Let's just say it's residential. It's a performing loan." And they're giving you kind of information about it and stuff. And then when you get the information provided to you, the facts about it, the documentation, kind of walk us through a little bit, like what's kind of the first couple steps you take just to kind of get an initial feel of like, I like this asset and I want to pursue further due diligence.
Right. So let's step back just a second.
Okay.
In that not all deals that you or I look at are brought to us by brokers, right? We both do a number of situations where we're dropping mail, just associates give them to us, or whatever. So a lot of times you've got a very unsophisticated seller.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to show you.
That's true.
And your process and my process differs. I mean, we both get to the same end, but
yeah.
A lot of my investors are doctors, lawyers, people like that. And the criteria they use when they look at these as sort of a 30,000 foot review is, would I want my college kid to live in that house? And if it passes that degree of muster, they decide to proceed or not with the deal, or to at least consider it. Now, so that means that what I do is I look at the house first thing. Right, straight out of the box. I don't know what the numbers are. Boom. I want to look at the house, see if it passes muster. Then I look at the neighborhood. I want to find out, are there bars in the windows? Are there junky cars? Are there what kinds of cars? All those things that you and I look at. So I'm looking at the neighborhood. Then I'm looking at the crime. I want to find out what crime rate is going on. I can do all those usually within about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
If it passed all those, then probably like you, my very next focus is payment history. And payment history is king, and I want to go from there. So maybe I'll stop there, and you can tell the crowd a little bit about how you start.
Sure. So I'm approaching it a little bit differently. I'm more focused on, I guess, looking at the spreadsheet, Richard. I kind of see the terms and I have kind of calculations going on of kind of what I feel like is a loan that I can use with a certain pool of money I'm working with today, whether it's in one of our company investment accounts, which will be cash, whether it's in one of our trust or retirement accounts, which would be money that we don't touch today, we kind of touch in the future. And so I'm approaching it from that angle. So, but I'm still looking at the numbers first. I'm taking into consideration what the interest rate is. I'm looking at, the down payment of the borrower. I'm looking at the payment, monthly payment per month. As you know, Richard, sometimes we run into these that are like $100 a month, and sometimes we run into them that are $1,000 a month in payment coming in. So you have to kind of weigh, like, is that going to be worth it, with due diligence costs and servicing fees, like all those things are coming to my mind. So I kind of have a spreadsheet laid out. I'm looking at those terms and numbers, and it falls within my range for this pool of money that I'm using. Mm-hmm. Then that's kind of my first pass. And similar to you, it's going to take a couple of minutes to look at it. And then at the same time, I want to see what the value of the house is. So kind of like my second pass, I'll kind of jump in and let you do your second pass, is looking at that property to see, like, okay, does it look like something? I like what you put. Would my college kid live there, to pass your mustard test? That's right. Great. Because I've lived in some pretty beat up college houses, so I understand what you're saying. But maybe the ones that I lived in maybe are a little bit beneath the standard of some of your investors that would like to borrow, get that loan going. But yeah, I'm looking at that. I'm looking at the neighborhood as well on my second kind of pass there, and just seeing, does it look like it's in fear of having, murders, homicides, right, things that are really bad, violent crimes. If it's just petty theft and stuff like that, break-ins, as far as car break-ins and stuff, then I'm not as concerned with it, especially if it's not on that street. If it's just a street that's nearby, maybe one or two streets away, I'm not as concerned with that. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at next. So you go ahead. What's your second? Your second thing, I think you said, is pay history is what you're going to next?
Yeah, so pay history, that's the next thing I would look at. And if I've satisfied that, then my second tier sort of mirrors your first tier, where I'm looking at it and saying, all right, what's my investment value? How would I do this? Where would I put this? As you know, we're both looking at a portfolio right now where the asking price is so close to the unpaid balance that there's not a whole lot we can do with it, but either sell it as a whole note or hypothecate it. And for those of you who do not know what hypothecation is, it's a situation where we can give a part of the cash flow to our investors and keep a small portion for ourselves. And it's it's a very easy structure to work with. But that being said, I have to say, well, can I do this as a partial? How long is a term? If I'm going to cut something into a partial, then I want it to have a nice long tail. So if it's a 25-year deal, I sell a 10-year partial. I want to know they've got 15 years of payments left coming back to me, as opposed to 2 years, which would make it not worth my while. So I'm starting to run through all the numbers like that. And that's my second tier.
Okay. So I like how you put it in tiers. So I kind of combined my first tier, my first pass, into kind of one thing. I do look at the numbers first, and then after that, I'm looking at the value if I like what I see. So as Richard was explaining, we're looking at a spreadsheet of loans, and we've got, let's just say, anywhere from a couple to maybe 100. You got to narrow it down pretty quickly as far as, what is going to, where you want to be at, right? What's going to make you happy? So if you're able to cherry pick, as we say, pick the best ones that fit exactly what you want to do, then it makes it easier to go through and kind of be specific about what you want. You don't have to take the whole thing. You can just be specific and be like, I like this one, I like that one, and you can be kind of picky and choosy about it. So, right. But that pay history is what I would start turning to next, is looking at it to see, like, okay, if this is a performing loan that the seller says, how strong is that pay history? Am I seeing payments like clockwork, consistent every time? Is it consistent at the due date? Is it consistent later on before it's late? Is it erratic? Is it on time one month, and then the next month is it towards the end of the due date? So all those factors weigh into the story I'm creating for this borrower, knowing, okay, the propensity to repay this is high, but I'm going to have some struggles as far as cash flow. I'm not going to see that on the first of the month. I might see that on the 15th, and I might see it on the 20th of next month, and stuff like that. So those things I'm taking into consideration. Now, Richard, I'm getting comfortable with going, okay, I can give this a value at what I would pay for, what we would pay for it based on those first three strong factors of looking at the numbers, looking at that property value and the property, and then looking at that pay history for a performing loan. And then kind of we get really comfortable as far as like, here's our strike price here. And we wouldn't fluctuate much more beyond that price, because after that, first 5 to 10 minutes of looking at that asset, we're pretty comfortable where we're at.
Right. And so I like the way you talk about the story, because what I would call my third tier starts to build the story also. Notice neither of us has mentioned credit history up to this point. So we're looking at the payment history very, very, very much. And of course, if we can find out about the credit report, some sort of credit report, then that's great. But that's more often not the case. It's more difficult to do that. But we can build the story. We can say, okay, third tier, where is this property located? Is it between two geographic cities so that Mr. or Ms. Borrower could work in one place or the next? Do they have some sort of job that's steady? Do they work for the post office? Do they work, are they a doctor assistant? Are they a plumber or whatever? How versatile is what they're doing? Or are they working on the line for General Motors? In general, if somebody is just working a line job like that, I won't do that deal, because if that factory gets shut down, the whole city's shut down, and it kills one of your exits, basically, in a lot of different ways. It kills the housing market, it kills their ability to get another job. But if somebody's a plumber, that usually means they're pretty good with their hands, and they can probably do some drywall work, and they can probably do some other stuff and stay alive. So that's where I'm really, really building the story.
So Richard, I like what you just said, because that's something that I don't hone in on very well, is looking at that borrower and let's just call it the ambient situation around them, which is their job status, which is important because, quite honestly, let's just be real about this. We're dealing with working class property value homes in working class areas with working class folks. And so they are probably living close to paycheck, if not paycheck to paycheck all the time. So you made a great point about looking at the job of that borrower. You don't have to necessarily see the credit if we see that pay history in some length there. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But that's a great point, and it's something that I don't take into consideration very often at all. I probably would with a non-performer. I would look at it more closely, but for a performer, I don't look at it as much. So I like what you said, and it kind of changes my attitude now a little bit, looking at different assets and seeing if they're like did you call it a line worker or a line job? Yeah,
a line job. Yeah, in other words, they're on the assembly line. They're doing something where that's their niche. That's all they're doing. And as you know, in Indiana, but also especially in Ohio, places like that, there's a lot of towns that live and die based on one or two plants. It doesn't have to be motors. It can be, there's a couple others that I came across the other day that I thought was very interesting. But
as far as what the factory does?
Yeah.
Well, so we get to this point and we establish a value of this asset. So Richard and I, you and I are still going to buy an asset if the price is right. It could be $1, it could be close to full value, right? It just all depends on all these things that we're looking at. So at this point, we throw out a price, and then the seller has to agree to it before they sell it to us.
Right. And that, as you know, is quite often I won't say a long process, but an interesting process in terms of why people sell and people's stories. And I ran into a very interesting divorce case yesterday where they're selling because of a divorce. So,
Yeah, sometimes those are not fun situations that, the seller is involved with, but also, I mean, you got to think of it. It's kind of a win-win. We're looking for a good deal. They're looking to exit out of this inventory because they have to satisfy, a new, we want to say a new debt, if you will. Their
Mhm.
their debtor is now the X, right? So
Right.
they have to split everything up. So, excuse me. So we got a little bit into pay history and stuff, and I want to touch on that a little bit. So before we get into that, I want to make sure we establish we have, let's just call it two sellers going on here. We have a more sophisticated seller, like if we're looking at a hedge fund or someone that is a professional and has a bunch of loans on Excel spreadsheet. And then we have what we call the mom and pop, who we deal with more often, is the individual seller that's not really that sophisticated, and you're trying to educate them to the process. You're trying to pull information from them, and you know that you're going to run into some problems, so you're pricing it kind of accordingly as well. So there's an ebb and flow and a song and dance, and this all sounds like pretty laborious work, but it's not that laborious as long as you know who you're talking to, and you kind of know, okay, I know I'm going to have an issue with this seller as far as they're not going to be very savvy on the computer. So I need to kind of help them figure out easy ways to give me the information so they don't get frustrated and kind of walk away from a deal that can really benefit both of us.
Right.
So the pay history, I'm looking at the pay history, Richard, and I'm saying if the down payment is sizable, and I'm going to say a sizable down payment is 15% or higher,
Mhm.
I'm going to make sure I see about six months of pay history, and it's got to be pretty solid. And then I'm comfortable moving forward with a price. Richard,
Right.
if I see a sizable down payment, but the pay history is younger than 6 months, I'm gonna step back for a minute and figure out a way. How can I still get into this deal but lower my risk as well? Because I haven't seen proof of concept totally yet. So I may come up with a different strategy, which we won't get into today, of buying it. But Richard, if you are seeing a loan that's a sizable down payment like I described, what are you looking for to see some seasoning in that loan?
Well, obviously, the longer the better.
Yeah.
I think you and I both look for 6 months plus. We'll do a deal if we can only get a year seasoning. But also, I want to look at the consistency of the payments. Now, some of my borrowers or some of the newer investors that we've spoken to get upset if somebody's 30-day late or something like that. And you and I both know 30 days is nothing. as long as they're paying.
Because there's a cherry on top, right?
That's right.
More than likely, that late fee is split between you and your loan servicing company 50-50.
Right.
So that's actually a cherry.
Right. I want to see how they are paying. Are they paying via ACH regularly? Is it automatically set up? Is it a MoneyGram? Is it a check? Is it a credit card? Do they consistently pay 20 days late? I've got one borrower who hit his late fee on 15 days after, and he pays on the 20th day. And I called him up and I said, do you realize, this has cost you an extra $20 a month? And he says, yeah. I mean, not that difficult to save up just a little bit to get a month ahead so you never incur that. But so everybody's got a pattern. And if that fellow wants to pay 20 days late, but he does so consistently, I'm fine with that. I don't think it makes much sense, but that's fine. So I'm looking for consistency in his payments, whatever it is.
So I interviewed Tracy Rury the last time I had a podcast here, which was episode number 10. And Tracy brought up a pretty interesting fact in her experience, and she's obviously been in the note business a lot longer than you and I have, is that she found out that if a borrower put down a down payment of less than 10%, she found there was a high probability of that borrower at some point in time having a pretty good bump in the road, meaning they might miss a couple payments, or they might completely just fall off the wagons as far as being able to pay and make the payment back. And she said that's kind of her magic threshold to say, like, okay, if I know that this borrower is a 10% less down payment, I'm going to price this accordingly, knowing that I'm going to have some challenges down the road to protect myself. Do you look at it that way as well, Richard?
Yeah, I would say I look at that. I also look at what I would say, I try and gauge what the emotional history is. I've got one deal in Alabama that grandpa lived in it, and then mom and dad lived in it, and now the daughter's living in it. And surprisingly enough, they've still got a mortgage payment, which is a whole other question as to why. There was some refining done there at some point. But there's a whole lot of emotional equity in that house. And what improvements have they made? Did they add a new garage? Is a new a roof on it? And all this type of stuff goes into that story. And I'm in the nice position of not having enough defaults to be able to make a prediction on more or less than 10% equity. But it wouldn't surprise me if Tracy's right.
Yeah. So she had some pretty good seller finance data information that if you guys haven't checked out episode 10, I highly recommend you go back and watch that one as well. And by the way, if you want to see the video version of this podcast that we're airing today, you just go to the BrightPath Notes YouTube channel and look up Be the Bank podcast, and you will see the videos of all of our podcasts that we've done, even the previous seasons of season 3, 2, and 1 as well. This is season number 4. So, Richard, we talked about due diligence. We talked about how you and I approach it a little bit differently. We talked about, different tiers, first, second, third tier. We talked about how we price it. We talked about looking at that pay history, creating that story. This is all for performing loans residential, right? That's kind of our bread and butter. We could get into commercial, but I think that'll extend us past our time for today if we get into commercial too much. So I want to stick with the residential, but I want to flip the script a little bit. And we got some time here, so I'd like to approach the non-performing aspect of it. Or actually, let's step back a little bit before we get into that, and let's talk about the reperforming aspect of it. So we're seeing a lot of loans now that are coming across our desk, Richard, that are reperforming loans. So at first light, if someone is looking for a performing loan, they're like, well, if they're reperforming, that means at some point, right, they had a modification or they had a default or something happened, right? Isn't that a problem? Well, you kind of have to put your blinders on for a minute and think about, okay, what's the current situation? What really happened? Why they became a reperforming loan? Was it really bad to where they were 3 or 4 years behind and they just wanted to walk away? And the lender said, oh, no, we'll cut your debt in half. I mean, not likely. But maybe it's a thing to where, it looks like COVID happened. I'm still making some income, but I'm not making as much as I used to. Can we stretch the term out longer? Can we lower my payment just a little bit to make it, $50 less a month? So when we look into those things, Richard, we look at those reperforming loans. They're not going to be priced as high as a performing loan, but they're going to be priced pretty close to it. And so we're seeing a lot of those. And when I'm looking at those Richard, I'm seeing some pretty consistent pay histories with the reperformers. So it seems like the borrower, you got into the story or the emotional equity into the borrower, and you can tell that they're appreciative of their new current situation by that new pay history from the time it was the modification going to whenever we're looking at it like today.
I'd agree with all that. I'd like to step back, though, just a second and define better what a reperformer is. You can say, well, it's just one where somebody's starting to make their payments again. Great. But as you and I have both seen, we've seen several tapes. And for people who don't know, what tape is usually a spreadsheet. It's an old term for a spreadsheet that has all the data for the loans on it, where they say, oh, gee, these are reperforming, and they've made 1, maybe 2 payments. That's not reperforming to me. I want to see something that's got 6 months payments, something like that, where, as you say, they had a medical hiccup, they had a COVID hiccup, they had a whatever, but they've proven themselves.
Yeah.
Because if they've only made 1 or 2 payments, to me, that's still non-performing, and it's going to get a whole lot lower price.
Yeah, it's almost like they're on probation for 12 months. I like to think of it. If I had a group of reperformers to look at, I would highly prefer them to be 12 months of pay history or longer. I do still pull the trigger on stuff that are, I'll call it younger than 12 months. And it kind of has to do with, let's just face it, the value of the house, right? If the value of the house is twice as much as the current unpaid balance, I will take a little bit more risk and probably invest in that loan if the numbers make sense to me, as opposed to seeing that longer pay history if the value of the house isn't that much more than the unpaid balance. So I kind of take that into consideration, but more than likely, I'm going to have to see at least 6 to 8 months of pay history on a reperformer, and assuming the house value is about, probably 30 to 40% higher than the UPB itself.
Right. That you bring up a very good point, which is location, location, location.
Yeah.
Is this house out in Lower Egypt someplace where, you're not going to be able to get a contractor to come in and fix it up? It's going to be a pain in the butt to get people to look at it.
Yeah.
Or is it in the suburbs of Indianapolis or something like that, where there's easy access to all those things that would enable you to put it back on the market? And very much, yes. If it's, and this goes back to your story, where there's a whole story for this. You could have a 50% loan to value deal, but if it's the only house within 100 miles, I'm probably still not going to do that deal.
That's true. So, and so that gives the value, the speculation. All right. That one is very subjective value, right? It's in the eyes of the beholder, what you think it is.
Right. So
those,
this is probably a good time to bring up the Walmart rule. Right?
The Walmart, I like the Walmart rule,
which you and I both know. So,
yes.
So for the viewers and listeners out there, the Walmart rule is that if the house is within 10 miles or 10 minutes of a Walmart, that is a huge stamp of approval on at least the location, because Walmart does not put their or place their stores lightly. They do extensive market research before they place any of them. And that means that there's economic viability to that whole area, if there is. Plus, it means that they have a great place to buy their groceries, but we don't care about that. So,
Very economical place, right?
That's right. That's right.
A great point, Richard. I thought we would have time to get the non-performing part of it. We kind of don't for today. So we're going to get into some more fun questions as we do at the end of the podcast. So this episode is brought to you by BrightPath Notes. Stay tuned, Richard. I got some more questions for you.
Okay.
All right, Richard. So I kind of want to know, and you mentioned this before on the podcast about kind of your kind of plans. You have what I call kind of an aggressive plan that you kind of play with your retirement account. And that is that you tell me that you often want to, I don't know what the word that you use, I'm just going to say this, flip your money or turn your money over multiple times in a year. So it's almost seems like it's an ATM. And I like how you word that, and thinking about that, in my head, I always say to myself, you know what, that's an easy way to look at trying to put velocity on your money. So if you're a full-time professional, note investor like ourselves, a real estate investor, I like how you approach that. So can you explain a little bit why you're thinking?
Sure. So my goal is to roll my money. That's the term I
roll.
use.
There we go.
My target is 3 times a year. So let's say I've got $50,000, right? And whether I'm selling a whole note or a partial, the partial, if you can do that, is a lot more beneficial to me.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I buy a note for $50,000 and I sell it and I make a $5,000 profit. Well, if I can take that, I sell that note, I go out and buy another note, sell that note, rinse and repeat. If I've tripled that, I've made $15,000 off that one $50,000 in a year. That's a heck of a return. That's $45,000 on a $50,000 investment. That's my goal. I often don't do that. I often only get to be twice. If I can sell a partial, it's even better. Mm-hmm. Because I've got, to use my typical 25-year deal, I've sold the first 10 years for close to what I bought it for. I retain the back 15 years of that note. So I've just created 3 debt services of 15 years apiece for myself out of that $50,000. And at the end of the day, I've still got $50,000 to rinse and repeat and do it again next year.
So these are the little tricks that make performing loans in that category. They can be very lucrative as well. It's not just investing in a loan and just getting a return on a monthly basis. It's figuring out ways how to recycle your cash and do it in a manner at which you can make large chunks of income, almost like having a non-performer. If all things go well for it, you get a pretty sizable return after a long period of time. But it seems like performing loans, sometimes if you have the right strategy and the right situation, you can make it very lucrative for yourself as well if you're a professional investor.
Right. So the partial strategy is good, but you can say, well, Richard, you don't get any income for 10 years. And you're right. So what you're doing with that is you're building an annuity. So if you look at your business plan, hopefully what you would do is you do several whole note sales to keep your lights on right now. You might do some hypothecations because they create current money also. Not as much as, say, a brokerage deal, but they create current money. And then you would also, but it's longer term current money. And then you would also do partials, which is setting yourself up for 10 years out. So right. I'm, in my late 60s. I can do 5-year partials right now. And if I looked at my books right now, I've probably got 30 or 40 partials that are start clicking in the next 6 or 7 years. So that'll be a nice little income.
Absolutely. That'll be nice. Richard, thanks for sticking on today and being a part of episode 11. Again, this is brought to you by BrightPath Notes, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks again, Richard, man. I'll see you next time.
Great. It's fun. Thanks very much, Justin.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bank. We hope you learned something from today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us. Plus, check out our BrightPath Notes channel on YouTube and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Be the Bank and on Instagram at Be the Bank Podcast. Be the Bank is sponsored by BrightPath Notes. Thanks again for listening.